We have a lot to cover in today's video, including a lot of offseason speculation, talking about the Tampa Bay Lightning and Steven Stamkos. If they're able to sign him, could it cost them another key player as a cap casualty? And if he does leave, where would he end up? We have two main teams we want to focus on, courtesy of an article in the Hockey News, plus some talk about the possibility of Patrik Laine ending up in Montreal and how that might work. What would a trade look like? We also have some talk around the future of Patrick Kane. Could he have a reunion with his old club? We also learned lots about lots of different teams today involving some media availability, including Gabriel Landeskog speaking this morning. Lots of Canuck news around injuries and everything as they do their offseason availability today to clear out the season. We have the GM of the Year award and lots more, including a recap of last night's Panthers-Rangers game coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to cover today. Let's first start with the Stanley Cup playoffs update. The Eastern Conference Final got underway last night, and we saw the Florida Panthers take Game 1 from the New York Rangers on the Rangers home ice, 3-0. Sergei Bobrovsky pitches a shutout. The Panthers had a pretty solid game overall. Didn't give up a ton of chances, and when they did, Bobrovsky was great and shut down the Rangers. So clearly, one big thing that I was surprised at was that the New York Rangers did not have Matt Rempe in the lineup. I know when Laviolette was speaking to the media ahead of the series starting, he had mentioned that Rempe wouldn't be, afraid to kind of lay the lumber and, to kind of be the equalizer, so to speak, for some of the nasty players on the Panthers. And he didn't even get to play in Game 1. I was really surprised. Neither team scored on the power play. So there was that. Obviously, whoever gets going on that first is probably going to have a leg up for sure. At the end of the day, Shesterkin was pretty good. It's not like he had a horrible game. The last goal was an empty netter. The second goal was off of Alexis Lafreniere's stick. It was basically an own goal from Carter Verhaeghe, shot it from the sideboards. It hit Lafreniere's stick and goes in past Igor. So certainly not really that bad of a game. It's closer than it would seem, but the Panthers had the edge. Bobrovsky was the difference, and no Rempe to me. Question mark. I got to think he gets in Game 2. We got to wonder about the possibility of inserting another veteran with it. Seems like it's possible that Blake Wheeler may be ready to enter the series too. So we'll see what adjustments the Rangers make in Game 2. Of course, tonight we've got Game 1 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Dallas Stars. Of course, that'll get underway from the Lone Star State. That game gets underway here just a little while. So certainly lots of action going on today. We had lots of media availability today, including some to do with the Avalanche, the Canucks, and some coaching talk. So let's talk about all that news. We started the day off with a press conference featuring Avs GM Chris McFarland and Captain Gabriel Landeskog. Landeskog hasn't played in 2 years. The fact that there was a press conference called and that he was going to be a part of it made a lot of people think that he might be hanging him up, or he may be declaring that after 2 years and all his best efforts that a return wasn't possible. But that's not the news that we got today. Gabriel Landeskog said anything but that, essentially saying that he's still very hopeful and very optimistic that he can play next year. He still very much wants to play. And all the work he's done, he feels he's getting closer. He said it's really difficult to say how close he was to playing if the Avalanche had continued. Probably not that close. He said mentally he was feeling ready, but considering the plan he's on with the return and the progress and everything, it probably wouldn't have happened. He couldn't even guarantee that he could be ready for training camp to start next season on time. Because one of the reporters asked him, so if you anticipate to play next year, when do you think you're going to be ready? And he said sometime between September and April. So it wasn't even a case of I'm expecting to be available for training camp. I think at this point it's probably a goal of his. He still has several months to get ready for that, but he could not say for sure, right? I mean, there's still the possibility of a setback, which he doesn't want to think of, I'm sure, after all this time. But essentially, he's kind of the first of his kind in the hockey world to have this type of surgery. With the cartilage replacement surgery, it's a newer thing. It's going to take him a while. He was told it could be up to 18 months. And even though some people say, yes, it's been 2 years, but he didn't have that surgery immediately. He had another surgery first, had some setbacks, wasn't getting the recovery he needed to play, and then went down this road. So, realistically, I would say based on those timelines, I wouldn't be shocked if he started next season on time or close to it. But again, like we said, really hard to say. They also spoke a lot about Val Nichushkin. Both Landeskog spoke from the player's perspective. McFarland spoke from the team management perspective. It sounds like there's a pretty good chance that he will return to the team. They cannot buy him out. They cannot terminate his contract. They don't have any options just to make it go away. It doesn't work that way. He's in the player assistance program. He does have some protection that way. Once he's healthy and deemed, fit to return, there might be some options, but it would only be if they mutually agree to terminate, and he'd have to have some options lined up to replace his income with another team and whatnot. It's probably not going to happen. They said in all likelihood, there's a good chance he will be an Avalanche again once he's released from the program, which is hopefully be around November, and he can rejoin the team. They did admit, though, that it's going to be difficult to rebuild the trust with him because obviously they care deeply for him as a person and a teammate, and they're, it's a combination of feelings, right? You're wanting the best for him, but I'm sure as a player perspective, you can't help but be a little bit frustrated because of the impact on the team. So, balancing that out and having that trust that he's going to be there when you need him most, it's going to be tough. But at this point, it seems like they're willing to take him back as long as he can kind of prove that he's conquered his demon, so to speak, and he can move forward, and we'll see. But don't expect any kind of contract termination or anything of that nature over the course of the summer. That's not going to happen. The other thing we really learned about some of the teammates as well as Arturi Lehkonen does need shoulder surgery, which he'll be having within the next week. And when they asked if he'd be ready for training camp, they said it would be close, but maybe not. So it's possible he may be delayed getting into camp, might miss the beginning of the season, hard to say, but it's a pretty big surgery, of course, so we'll have to wait for further updates later on. We also got some media availability, of course, from the Vancouver Canucks today. A lot of players spoke to the media, some which were more, interesting than others, you could say. I know at least Pettersson did, which I found this really weird. Pettersson did admit that he did have an injury. He said he's been dealing with a knee issue since January. Asked if they would need it to be surgically repaired or anything of that nature. He said no, basically just some rest. When Rick Tocchet later spoke to the media, he said that it was he described it kind of like a tendonitis. I find it really weird that if this came up in January, especially where they acquired Elias Lindholm early. Now I know Lindholm ended up getting hurt himself later on, but you couldn't have seen that coming, I guess, right? But why didn't they rest him then? At this point, they had a phenomenal first half of the season. They were sitting in good spot in the standings. Why would they have not got him to sit out and to take care of this injury then so that he would have been hopefully 100% for playoffs? They knew at this point in the campaign that there was a really high probability they're going to clinch a spot, and they're going to want him at his best to try to win in the playoffs. It just, to me, is a real head scratcher. It kind of makes you half believe it, and I'm not calling anybody a liar here. I don't have any reason to say that. It just seems really handled weirdly. So I'm going to go on the assumption that they're being honest and telling the truth, and he really does have a knee issue. But like I said, if it's been going on since January, that doesn't make any sense to me why he wouldn't have taken some time and just dealt with it then. I understand players wanting to play and trying to be warriors and play through things, but when your team's you're middle of the season and your team's in a really good spot in the standings, like, why wouldn't you do it then? Clearly, for the rest of the way, his performance was greatly affected. He even said in his interview that he played like crap for the last 3 months. So, okay, all right. Well, if it was having that much of an issue on you, at some point during that last stretch of regular season, why didn't you take some time? That's what I don't believe anybody in the media really brought that up. I just don't understand how that was handled. Didn't make any sense to me. I know Philip Hronek was asked about his tale of two seasons within a season, so to speak, that his first half was great. His second half wasn't very good production-wise. Playoffs weren't very good production-wise. Asked if he'd been dealing with some injuries or anything happened, kind of why he thought each half of the season was so different for him. And he was really pissy with the media. Just considering Hronek was a player who barely spoke to the media all year and kind of flew under the radar in Vancouver with Hughes and Besser and Miller and Pettersson and all these other guys on the team often doing the media. Well, he didn't have to speak a whole lot. And really asked about your season, to react the way he did with a real negative, grumpy look on his face, and just all he said was, well, if I knew, I would have done something to fix it, and you want me to give you an excuse? Like, there's no injuries. Anyways, I was just really disappointed with his answer. Like, and you want $8 million and you can't even answer a straight question from the media and without acting like that. Like, to me, that was just disappointing. Regardless of what was going on or not. And you could have said, like, no, there was no injury. The second half was tough for me. I don't know if I can really pinpoint exactly. Like, there's easier ways to do this without kind of coming off like he did. Like, just to me, it was completely unfair. And Brock Besser did acknowledge the blood clots and how emotional it was for him to find this out. He said essentially what happened was in the first game of the Oilers series, he blocked a shot in his leg. And of course, it was, quite sore, and then it kept getting worse. So it started getting to the point that it was like really, really bad, and then developed a blood clot. So, as I had mentioned, when the blood clot issue first came up, there's lots of issues that can cause them, and it's certainly a situation where hockey players, I feel, are, of all athletes, the most prone to it because of the nature of how they play and the contact and the blocking shots, etc. Like, a major wound like that can cause that. We got other news today as well. Los Angeles Kings officially announced Jim Hiller as the new head coach permanently. Of course, we found out the news yesterday that this was confirmed, but we also confirmed today that DJ Smith is indeed returning as an assistant, and they're going to add one more assistant coach, and they're in the midst of trying to figure out who that is now. Marco Sturm, who's the head coach of their American Hockey League affiliate, the Ontario Reign, is not interested at all in even going up to the NHL as an assistant coach. I know when he was one of his last media availabilities with the American Hockey League team that I heard him talking, he was asked if he had interest to possibly, try to move up within the organization to an open spot as an assistant coach with the Kings in the NHL, and his answer was, no, I'm a head coach. I was like, ooh, I didn't get a good vibe. I'm like, yeah, but like most coaches start off as assistant coaches. Like, it's not really like I just thought that was a bit much myself. I had to say, no, I'm a head coach. Like, look at all the guys that are assistant coaches around the NHL. Several of them either have the desire to be head coaches, will be head coaches, or have been head coaches. It's not unusual in the least, so I thought that was a really weird comment. He is in the mix to join the Sharks as possibly their new head coach. I mean, he has connections to that franchise from his playing days, so we'll see where he eventually ends up. We do have the candidates as well for the GM of the Year award, and the finalists are Jim Nill of the Dallas Stars, Patrick Allvin of the Canucks, and Bill Zito of the Florida Panthers. So, of course, all their teams had really solid years. Of course, to some degree, to do with the work that they did to make those teams what they are. So, certainly, 3 deserving candidates. There's probably, in my opinion, at least 3 or 4 others that could have been finalists as well. I really couldn't pick apart these guys to say that they shouldn't be there, though, to be honest. So, we'll see who ends up being the eventual winner here. There's going to be a vote in the American Hockey League coming up, I believe, in the next day. I'm not sure if it actually might be today or tomorrow. There's going to be a vote regarding, I guess, because technically the Arizona Coyotes still exist in name, and the Utah team, which is yet to be named, of course, the former Coyotes AHL team is now the AHL team for the Utah franchise, the Tucson Roadrunners. And we knew that Alex Muriel, of course, who owns that team and retained that, there was some talk about moving them to Tempe to play at a Mullet Arena. And apparently they're proposing, and they must have everything lined up, I'm sure, with Mullet to be able to do it. Otherwise, it kind of makes no sense. But to be able to split the season, they're going to play 14 games at Mullet and 22 in Tucson. Now, that's what the vote is, to approve them to be able to do this, to play in multiple locations. There is going to be some conditions, though, if they do say yes to this, that, for example, when they take them to Tempe to play, that they can't just usher them back and forth, that they have to provide them a hotel. So, and there could be some other conditions too. They want to make sure that the players are properly looked after and not going to be, especially after everything and all the allegations against the Coyotes and Murillo for, all the undervalued hotels and paying the hotel bills late and all those things. I don't know if that has to do with that or just, in general here, but it should be complicated, but we'll find out soon enough if that is going to be approved. So in the rumor mill, lots to talk about today. Let's start with Tampa. There's 2 different scenarios, of course, that can play out with Steven Stamkos. Either he stays or he goes. That's not the hard part of figuring out where and how things are going to work out for the Lightning captain and whether or not he'll remain with the franchise likely for the remainder of his playing career. We do know that Steven Stamkos is a pending unrestricted free agent. We know that there's been very little talks up until, well, at least there was none during the season. Julien Brisebois insisted on not doing that and waiting until after, which is, well, it's after now. And I believe there's been some talks at the very least so far. And when Brisebois acquired Ryan McDonagh here this week, he also made comments that he felt very confident they were going to be able to sign and retain Steven Stamkos. Well, if you look at their cap situation after acquiring the full contract of Ryan McDonagh, they only have like over $5 million available. And Stamkos is not the only player that needs to be signed. They're going to have to sign like 3 to 4 other players. So that doesn't really leave much money. I can't see Stamkos taking like, a $1 million deal. I guess you never know, but I doubt it. I mean, he's still scoring at a really high rate. There's no reason why he wouldn't be at least, I don't know, at least 6, if not maybe 7. I'm not really sure what he's going to want. To be honest, you could pay him 6, 7, 8. It's all really fair. But how much of a discount he's willing to take, I'm not sure. We don't really know that. There hasn't been any leaks or rumors suggesting what he wants, just that he'd like to stay in Tampa. But clearly, regardless of how low he's willing to go, it's going to prove very difficult. And in the event he stays, lots of people are speculating that that's going to probably cost them a really good player that's going to move as a cap casualty. And the two main names have been brought up as either Anthony Cirelli or Erik Cernak. Now, no offense to Stamkos. He's been a terrific captain, an awesome player, one of the best in franchise history, if not the best. But does it make sense to lose a really good player that's so much younger? As a cap casualty, it probably doesn't. Now, we've heard some people say that. Elliot Friedman said that at this point, he doesn't think Tampa will want to move Cirelli or Cernak or any of these other younger players that are, making in that, $5, $6, $7 million range. So, okay, if they don't want, I just don't know how they're going to do it. That's the hard part, right? So it makes you wonder, even though they said they're confident they could do it, are they really going to get it done? Hard to say, but like I said, is Cirelli going to end up getting traded over the Stamkos contract? Makes you wonder. Now, there was also a Hockey News article today suggesting that if Stamkos can't get a contract done in Tampa, where will he take his services to? And they list a few teams, but the main ones were the Toronto Maple Leafs, of course, which would be like a homecoming for him, or heading further south in Florida to the Florida Panthers. Now, the reaction and the kind of rationale behind either of these, both of those teams right now would have just as bad or worse cap situation as the Lightning. So it would not be easy to do, but it would be assuming that, for example, let's say the Panthers don't sign Sam Reinhart. We know they want to, but clearly he's been having a phenomenal season. Let's say they can't come to terms and he vacates. Well, that would create a roster spot. They can bring in Stamkos, who would sign for less than what Reinhart wants. Clearly, Reinhart had a phenomenal, 50-goal campaign. He's much younger. He's definitely going to be getting more money than Stamkos. That's pretty clear. So he could be an insurance piece if Reinhart leaves. Although at this point, we don't necessarily have any reason to think that there's a likelihood of that happening. But Reinhart's had a phenomenal season. There's going to be lots of teams that like to talk to him. Whether or not they make it to free agency, we'll see. But it does make sense that in that scenario, they would have some cap space. And yes, maybe he could be a good fit there. They're obviously in a very competitive situation where they're likely going to be contenders for the next few years. So it would be great for Stamkos. He wouldn't have to go very far. And he would obviously have a chance to add to the Stanley Cup on his profile and resume. Now, of course, the hometown Leafs would be under the assumption that they do make some trades and break up the core, and maybe because we don't know if Marner's leaving or going. Yesterday, Pierre LeBrun said that as of right now, Marner's camp has not been asked for any teams, so that we can't say with any certainty that he's going to be moved, but it's also really early in the offseason. And the Leafs have been focused on getting their new head coach, which is now done here in the last couple of days. So I don't expect them to even if they do plan to do it, the conversation with Marner and his agent around a trade and a contract extension to see how it's all going to work and what they decide to do probably won't happen for another probably couple of weeks, or at least seriously. So I think it's early to say that. I don't really know because it hasn't happened yet. Don't think it's fair to say that it won't. But if it did, and they moved out some serious money, obviously Stamkos could be a guy to come in as a replacement via free agency like they did with John Tavares, and somebody who can still play at a high level, score lots of goals, and be very effective. So clearly, Stamkos will have lots of options. That is not a doubt. Teams will line up to talk to this guy, and to bring him in as a veteran, on the tail end of his career, who's still producing high with all those experience and Stanley Cup to his name. Sure. It's going to be interesting to see how the Lightning go about retaining him, though, because they have such a tight cap situation. They no longer have like the Brent Seabrook contract for the LTIR option. I mean, they seem to be pretty content that they could keep him. And if Friedman says that they don't think they're going to have to move Chernak or Cirelli or one of these other guys, then how are they possibly going to do it? Is Stamkos going to give them that sweet of a deal that he signs for like $1 or $2 million? I just can't see that happening. Clearly, it's going to be a very interesting scenario to play out. Could Patrick Kane end up back in Chicago? Well, we know that there's a decent chance that he won't be back in Detroit. Can't say that with any kind of certainty just yet. But the last we had heard about Kane from Elliot Friedman around the end of the Red Wings season, just that there was certainly some, I guess you could say not a lot of optimism. Based on what he had heard, Patrick Kane, obviously after going to New York at the trade deadline 2 seasons back, and then this past year spending it in Detroit, he's on a 1-year deal after recovering from surgery. He would like some stability back in his career and would like to get a multi-year deal and have a place to play for the next few years and kind of ride out, may or may not be the end, but certainly the next chapter of his career for sure. Now, clearly, Patrick Kane played at a very high level this past year, was close to a point per game player. Rumor is he wants, like I said, some term. I don't know what he wants in money. Certainly more than he made last year. Even if he's willing to take a contract around $5-6 million in money, he might want 3-4 years in term. That's just speculation. We know he wants multiple years. I'm thinking 3 to 4 because he probably plans to play until he's about 40. And after having the surgery and coming back like he did last year, I think he's confident now he can do it. And really, it was how he played, So according to Scott Powers, who writes for The Athletic as a beat writer for the Blackhawks, he says now that even though when the Blackhawks moved on from Kane, it seemed like to be the end of the chapter. Now, after seeing how he played this past year in Detroit, that there's maybe some second thoughts there, and there's some interest, and they're in the next couple of weeks ahead of free agency. They're expected to, when they have their meetings, to be discussing the possibility of what would it be like to bring back Kane. Should we seriously consider this? They definitely want to add veteran help to work with Connor Bedard to make the team a little bit more competitive and to bring out more talent. And Bedard helps him excel as well. Kane would be the perfect veteran in a lot of senses. Former first overall pick. He can relate to him on a lot of levels. High skill level, still playing at a real high level like he did last year. Maybe he could go back to Chicago. Now, the only thing is if Patrick Kane wants to play for Stanley Cups, that's not going to happen. I mean, Chicago is a long ways off from being cup contenders. They're a long ways off from being playoff contenders. So we don't know what's most important to him, but the Blackhawks are at the very least expected to be something that they're mulling over and considering. And when they have their scouting meetings and all the, the prep for the offseason here in the next couple of weeks, it is on their agenda to discuss if they'd like to at least make him an offer to see if they can bring him back. So be curious to see how they feel about it and if it even becomes a more formal discussion on offering Kane a contract to return to his roots in Chicago. Lastly, I want to touch on the Montreal Canadiens. I was listening to some clips from one of the latest podcasts featuring Tony Marinaro of Montreal Media. Has what he calls the Sick Podcast Network that he's with, talking with, I think it was Grant McKay, talking about the possibility of the Habs going after Patrick Laine of Columbus. We know Patrick Laine had a really rough season last year, ended up in a player assistance program. I'm not sure if he's technically still in it or if he's been released, but he was in it at the end of the campaign. Had a real hard year. And I've speculated myself, without having any information from NHL insiders, that I really think he needs a fresh start. And I think he's a prime candidate for it. He's a heck of a player who just has had a hard time the last couple of years bringing out that player we saw in Winnipeg, scoring 40 goals the first few years of his career. He looked like he was projecting to be the next Ovechkin, or at least maybe not to that level, but somebody who you'd see competing for the Rocket Richard Trophy year after year. And he's really really gone downhill, lost a lot of that swagger. He's still a young man now. There's still lots of talent in there. If it changes scenery with some different teammates and the right help, I think they could get him to be a star player again. And we know that it's very likely that Ken Hughes goes out at the draft and tries to acquire a top young talent that he can get at what he feels to be a bargain to come to the Canadiens organization and be a top 6 player. And we know that they want a top 6 player, ideally somebody with size and some scoring ability. Well, Patrik Laine is 6'4" and has scored 40 goals multiple times. He fits that description, ticks a lot of boxes. Yes, the recent play is concerning. You'd want to do your due diligence. You'd want to check in on that. Clearly, his contract is, it's not long term, but the money is high. Maybe Columbus would eat a little bit of that to make it more viable. And what they suggested for a trade was one of their defensemen, because we know they have tons of them. So they said, either be like Jaden Struble, Jordan Harris, and maybe a first-round pick. Doesn't have to be this first-round pick that's 5th overall. They could offer another one, a future one, or what have you. And I believe they have a second one of this year's draft. Maybe it's that one. Like, it doesn't have to be, it wouldn't be 5th overall. I can't see that. But something along those lines. Or maybe it's one of those young defensemen and maybe it's a couple of mid-round picks, like something to that effect. It probably wouldn't be a huge price tag compared to, like, he was traded for P.L. Dubois. And, of course, that deal didn't really work out for either team, except for Winnipeg getting Dubois. It worked out better than Laine did in Columbus, and now they flipped Dubois to L.A., and they've got a good haul there. So, all in all, you can say that the Jets definitely won that trade. But realistically, I thought Columbus was going to have the edge myself, because Dubois seemed to be lacking motivation, and I thought Laine, with the right circumstances, would flourish again, but it didn't happen in Columbus. So could it happen somewhere else? Could it be Montreal? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.